The Islamic world. The Orient. This is Muhammad's legacy, the Quran, inspiration of great empires. For centuries, the sultans of Constantinople confronted the powers of Europe. In Africa, there are bloody conflicts. The Mahdi terrifies Christians and Muslims alike at Khartoum, shaking the colonial power to its core. In Arabia, Wahhabites force a tyrannical form of Islam on the tribes who first carried the faith into the world. Now, Islam is on an unfinished journey to the modern world. Almost 1,400 years ago, a man appeared on the Arabian Peninsula. He converted the Bedouin tribes to belief in one God. Through Muhammad, his people received a book, the Quran, that showed them the way and changed world history. He was also a warrior who won a remarkable string of victories. No political or religious movement has ever spread so quickly. Within decades, the exit of a few troublemakers from Mecca turned into a great Islamic empire. A remarkable new culture spread through North Africa, Asia Minor, and Southwest Europe, bringing new relationships with God and new ways of living. Europe of the Middle Ages was backward in comparison, but it learned, absorbing Arab medicine and science. This was the light from the East. But the days of Islamic splendor in Europe are numbered. In 1492, the last Muslim ruler of Granada is forced out of Spain. After almost 800 years, the Muslim presence here has come to a peaceful end. But this isn't the end of the relationship between Islam and the West. A new Islamic superpower has been growing in the East, the Ottoman Empire. It covers a wide sweep of North Africa, the Middle East, and the Balkans. It has been poised at the gates of the greatest Christian city on earth, Constantinople, today's Istanbul. By taking this city, the Turkish sultans and their empire enter world history. 1453, Turkish forces besiege the capital of the ailing Byzantine Empire. They have the most powerful military technology in the world, cannons. For months, the citizens hold out against the siege. Then, the chronicles tell us, an advance guard find a forgotten gate in the fortifications. Suddenly, the defenders find their enemies behind them, inside the city. Constantinople falls. The end of Christian control comes about not through the fanaticism of religious warriors, but through simple military advantage.
If you look at the flashpoints of the modern world, and you go back and you ask yourself, What was the origin of those flashpoints? Most times you will find that it was not driven by faith first, it was driven by political decisions.
That's true of the Ottoman sultans. They see themselves as Muhammad's legitimate successors. From the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople, they rule over a state where tens of thousands of Christians and Jews live harmoniously. With Europe mired in savage wars between Christian faiths, the empire of the sultans is almost a haven of tolerance. But it remains a real threat to its neighbors in Europe. Christian citizens of the Ottoman Empire have to pay a special kind of tax. Each family is forced to give up a son to become an elite soldier for the Sultan. The harvest of the boys. Forcibly converted to Islam, they become disciplined troops. These janissaries strike fear into the hearts of their European enemies for more than 200 years. There's another Muslim power in the world, at sea. It's no empire, but a few hundred daring sailors. In the 17th century, they become the terror of Europe's coasts, Berber pirates. Iceland in 1627. The peace of this isolated North Atlantic island is shattered by a pirate attack. Muslim corsairs. To the shocked villagers, they could be beings from another planet. The pirates aren't here to rape, pillage, or murder, but to do business. They kidnap healthy men and young women to ransom or to sell as slaves. Europeans are desirable goods. At the great North African Arab ports, white gold commands huge prices in the slave markets. Over 2 centuries, Muslim pirates capture and sell several 100,000 people.
The Arabic chronicles of the 17th century use the word jihad, holy war, in connection with the pirates. Well, of course, they used it to justify piracy. And of course, you mustn't forget that at this same time, European nations were trying to invade Morocco, to take over Arab territory. The Muslims really did see themselves engaged in a holy war, on land as well as at sea.
The word jihad has come to personify Western fear of the Islamic world. It's led to the widespread belief that Islam, as a religion, glorifies violence. The word jihad does come from the Quran, but it doesn't just mean holy war. The original meaning is an effort made in the interests of God. According to one account, Muhammad distinguished between the small jihad and the great jihad. The greater struggle is an internal one, with one's own weakness and mistakes. It demands a lifelong effort, with the goal of becoming a better person. It brings more merit than jihad with a weapon in your hand. But the Quran also understands jihad as a war in defense of the faith and sets out clear rules of engagement. Anyone who submits must be spared.
Wenn heute solche radikalen Vertreter,
if nowadays radicals write the word jihad on their banners,
dann hat das fast schon einen
then that's almost heresy.
Charakter.
Because jihad in a religious sense also means to do good, respect other people, and be a good example to them.
Und ihm Vorbild zu sein.
What the pirates called a holy war was really a trade in people. On a rather small scale, compared to the millions of Africans transported to the New World at precisely this time by Europeans. And like the pirates with the Quran, the Europeans were doing it with Bibles in their hands. As for the Ottoman Empire, by the 17th century, it has advanced into Eastern Europe. In 1683, it attacks the very capital of Central Europe, Vienna. A great Turkish army besieges the glittering home of the Habsburg emperors. In spite of furious resistance, the whole of Europe expects Vienna to fall. At the last moment, a Christian alliance defeats the Ottomans and forces them back eastwards into the Balkans. The Turks will never attack Central Europe again. In Europe, Turkish terror gives way to fascination. In the 18th century, Turkey is in. Palaces are built in the Turkish style, like this one at Svetzingen near Heidelberg in Germany. And from the Ottoman court in Constantinople, the reports of European diplomats tell of extraordinary luxury, of great parties with thousands of guests, and the magic of Oriental entertainments. Nothing fires the European imagination more than a mysterious, forbidden area, the harem. Inside the Sultan's private apartments, home to his official wives and dozens of concubines. To Europeans, this is a kind of erotic heaven. Countless women with only one aim, to satisfy the desires of a single man. Yet the harem is also a place for poisonous ambitions. In its maze of corridors, the women live together with their sons, and only one of those sons can be heir to the throne. There is no law of succession. The most ruthless wins power, buying support to sweep his brothers and half-brothers out of the way. Murder as a political institution. The day Sultan Mehmet III seizes power in 1595, 19 of his brothers are killed. The new Sultan gives his victims a solemn burial. Some of the coffins are no more than a yard long. Several times, this cruel system almost destroys the entire dynasty. From the 16th century, they try to reform the system by keeping the young princes locked up together in the palace, in the kafis, the gilded cage, so they'll have no chance to kill each other. Living in a state of forced leisure, they receive no education in government. Now the Sultan is chosen by an imperial council. He has no real legitimacy and no experience on which to base his rule. Ottoman government becomes corrupt and incompetent. The cities of Arabia are still under the Sultan's control. From behind their palace walls, Ottoman governors administer the remains of a great culture, falling further and further behind the countries of Europe. The Orient has simply run out of energy. The fabulous wealth of the ruling class of the Ottoman Empire can do nothing to disguise that fact. The reason is clear.
One factor set back the Islamic world for hundreds of years. It was the Europeans' discovery of the sea routes to America and round Africa to Asia. Until then, Aleppo in Syria, the cities of Iran, and Cairo were great centers of international trade.
In the 17th century, Europeans take over international trade. Their ocean-going ships pioneer sea routes to India and East Asia. The treasures of Asia, spices above all, can now be taken straight to European markets without going via the middleman of the Near East. For hundreds of years, the caravans of the Silk Road brought luxury goods to the ports of the Mediterranean. But for more than a century, they have been losing business. With economic decline, cultural decline is inevitable. For a long time, the Ottoman Empire sees no scientific research. It has no universities, or even a mercantile middle class. It's a recipe for stagnation.
Education and scholarship has been the purview of a very, very small clique of male individuals. And so if scholarship is monopolized, if education is monopolized at the center by a small group, then interpretation, authority is also monopolized at the center. Culture, meaning, intellectualism, all of that becomes monopolized by a small group.
By the end of the 18th century, the only form of education for the great majority of Muslims is religious instruction. Just when scientists in Europe are beginning to force nature to reveal its secrets, intellectual discourse in the Islamic world is limited to analysis of the Quran. When suddenly, the modern world breaks in on the Orient. In 1798, Napoleon lands in Alexandria. From Egypt, he intends to conquer the entire Orient. Napoleon sheds blood, but he also brings laws. The French adventure in the Orient will end with Napoleon's defeat. But this invasion has made a deep impression on the Muslims. It has painfully exposed their backwardness.
At first, the Arabs and the Muslims in general only noticed that the French had new technology, that they had new weapons. They weren't interested in the fact that there was a whole culture behind them of independent thinking, freedom to learn, universities where you could speak and write freely.
In the 19th century, European culture means Paris. An Egyptian ambassador will be sent there in 1826. His mission is to find out what lies behind Europe's superiority. Sheikh Rifat al-Tatawi explores the salons of the bourgeoisie, a glimpse behind the scenes of success. Al-Tatawi carefully notes down his observations. He's especially interested in printed sheets of paper. They call them newspapers or gazettes. Every day you can find out what's happening around the country. Even if they contain lots of lies, they also have a lot of useful information. It's amazing. In this country, even young girls can read and write. And the behavior of their elders seems even more strange to this young Egyptian. Fornication is considered a minor sin among these women. The men are slaves to their women and obey them, whether they are beautiful or not. Almost 200 years later, the role of women in society still divides Islamic and Western cultures. The headscarf and veil are powerful external symbols of Islam. In fact, clothes regulations vary between countries and social groups. The Quran does require women to cover their hair. That's no invention of Islam, but a custom in Arab societies since ancient times, especially for women in higher social classes. Nowhere in the Quran is it mentioned that a woman must wear a veil or completely cover her face.
Today, a woman sometimes has to cover her face and go around like a black tent, so she can't even see which way she's going. But that's down to a misinterpretation of the surahs of the Quran. Men just want to force women into a different social role than they had at the beginnings of Islam.
By the 19th century, to Europeans, the Orient still means sensuality. The empire of seductive womanhood and free love. But the Orient is not just an early tourist destination. By the mid-19th century, European powers are competing to annex part of the Islamic world into their own expanding empires. In this scramble for colonies, the British take the lead. Britain is growing into the greatest imperial power the world has ever known. By 1880, they control the Indian subcontinent, Malaya and Burma, as well as large parts of Africa, including Egypt and the Sudan, where they stir up a hornet's nest. In the Sudan, warriors flock to a man named Mohammed Ahmed. His supporters believe he is the Mahdi, an Islamic Messiah who will free the faithful from slavery. In a few short years, they sweep through the Sudan, destroying an Egyptian army under British command. By 1884, they've reached the gates of Khartoum, the last British-Egyptian stronghold on the Upper Nile. After a siege of almost a year, the fortress falls. The Mahdi will sacrifice any number of his men to defeat the infidel. It's 13 years before the British can take back the city. A reminder to Europe just how explosive the power of Islam can be. Another political movement emerges from the Arabian desert and also gets its dynamism from Islam. Its mastermind is Muhammad ibn Abdel Wahhab. The Wahhabists soon take over the whole caravan trade that once flourished so mightily. They will attack everything they believe stands in the way of the true faith or smacks of idol worship. For the Wahhabists, poetry, science, music, art, even jewelry are superstition and the work of the devil. And they find a use for their spoils: to finance bloody campaigns against other branches of Islam, the ones they accuse of heresy. Medina, the site of an attack that will shake the Muslim world to its core. This is the location of the Prophet's tomb, the second holiest place in Islam after Mecca. For hundreds of years, rich and powerful Muslims have showered Muhammad's grave with valuable offerings. In spring 1803, the Wahhabists strike Medina and plunder Muhammad's grave. To these fanatics, even revering Muhammad, a human being, is idol worship. Many of the town's citizens are killed in the attack. One contemporary wrote, "The Wahhabists are divisive and ignorant, with neither wisdom nor piety. They claim that people have been living in unbelief for centuries. If they could, they would even destroy the stone of the Kaaba." The Wahhabists don't just defile the mosque of the Prophet, they also destroy the graves of respected Muslims, regarded by the people as saints. No one could predict that these Wahhabists will one day wield global power. But then Mohammed bin Saud comes on the scene. As leader of an important Bedouin tribe, he can give powerful support to Abdel Wahhab's fanatics. The strategic aims of the two men coincide. One wants control of the Arabian Peninsula. The other dreams of bringing all Muslims under his fanatical influence. They mount a campaign of destruction against the Shiite cities of today's Iraq and Iran, cities they see as nests of heretics. Mohammed bin Saud's ambitious plans will fail. He is caught and executed by the Turkish Sultan. But in the 20th century, his descendants will again seek power in Arabia to force through their radical form of Islam. This time, they succeed, founding the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
There's no question that the Wahhabization of Islam is the principal reason why the West thinks of Islam not just as monolithic and archaic, but also as violent and obsessed with jihad. These are the foundational principles of Wahhabi Islam. What is interesting, however, is that the Wahhabists make up the tiniest fraction of the world's 1.5 billion Muslims. If there weren't oil in Saudi Arabia, no one would have ever heard of Wahhabi Islam because it was a Bedouin religion.
Oil makes the Bedouin tribe of the Sauds the world's richest family. Suddenly, they're being wooed by the great industrial nations. And the clan of the Sauds control the sacred sites of Islam. That gives their regime legitimacy in the wider Islamic world. In today's Saudi Arabia, the Quran is the country's constitution. This is a kingdom without democratic institutions, with a concept of justice from a very distant past. Women may not drive. Thieves have their hands amputated. But the Saudi Arabian model is only one of many in Islam. The event that permits the rise of the Sauds also creates the Middle East as we see it today. The fall of the Ottoman Empire, caused by the First World War. In 1914, the Ottoman Turks joined the fighting on the side of the Germans. By this time, Enver Pasha's military government in Constantinople has deposed the last Ottoman Sultan. The Germans know that their ally is militarily rather weak, but they have other ideas how to use them against their enemies. In the archives of the German Foreign Office is a remarkable document. A top-secret plan for the deposed Sultan to announce a worldwide jihad against Britain and France. There would be terrorist attacks on the Suez Canal, suicide bombings of politicians, uprising in British and French colonies. The German High Command believed that the Sultan has complete authority over Muslims, like the Pope in the Catholic Church. His word will be obeyed worldwide. It's a fatal misunderstanding. In Islam, there has never been one single central religious authority able to rally all Muslims across the world. The plan fails. But this is a global war for Muslims too. Hundreds of thousands fight in the Near East and in the trenches of Europe. Turks die beside Germans. Muslims from Algeria die for France. Indians die for the British. The Ottomans fight bravely, but theirs is a lost cause. A Turkish officer called Kemal Pasha returns to defeated Istanbul as a war hero. Later, they will call him Ataturk, father of all the Turks. Kemal Ataturk seizes power and founds the Republic of Turkey on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. As dictator, he forces through a cultural revolution that has no equivalent in Islamic history. Radical Europeanization, school for everyone, the Latin alphabet, universities for women, the abolition of polygamy, and of the veil. Under Ataturk, Muslim Turkey's constitution strictly separates state and religion. Many Turks are proud of that. Others now demand a return to Islamic traditions. But Ataturk's legacy can no longer be erased. For the Arabs too, World War I is an epical event. For most Arabs, Ottoman rule means brutal suppression. They hate the Turks. When war breaks out, the British study ways to take advantage of this hatred. They pay huge sums to the Emir of Mecca to rebel against the Turks. The British officer sent to guide this uprising is T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. For the tribe's help, his masters promised them an independent Arabia. The Arab uprising helps clear the way for the British march northwards, all the way through Palestine to Jerusalem and Damascus. The Arabs have a vision, an Arabian kingdom with Damascus as its capital. But at the peace conferences, the British have forgotten their promises. Instead of creating a greater Arabia, the British and French divide the Middle East according to their own commercial interests. With strokes of the pen on the map, in the best colonial tradition, there's no consideration for ethnic and religious realities. The victors create Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, where later Israel will be, Iraq, Lebanon, and many other states. Some of them centers of conflict to the present day.
It's part of sort of the historical memory of the Arab world. And it has, in many ways, created this sense of mistrust, a sense that, you know, whatever the West says, you can't really take them at their word. And I think one can really understand why this is. I mean, it's born of experience.
The democratic governments of Britain and France create a series of monarchies in the Middle East. Kingdoms are more predictable for the European powers than unstable, untested democracies. But in the great cities of the Middle East, in Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, opposition to the colonial powers and their puppet governments grows. Intellectuals, some of whom have studied in Europe, found parties. Liberals, nationalists, and socialists spread their ideas. They agree on one thing: the need for independence. The British and French try to nip these tendencies in the bud. Arrests are routine. Only slowly, after a Second World War, unrest, and civil conflict, will the colonial powers withdraw from the Middle East. One man becomes the symbol of Arab independence and a new pan-Arabic consciousness: Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. In 1956, he nationalizes the Suez Canal, still under British control. The British, French, and Israelis attack Egypt. But international pressures force the invaders to withdraw. It's a great triumph. Nasser reawakens the dream of a pan-Arab state, reaching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. For a while, the idea seems to gain momentum. Egypt and Syria form a political union. It lasts for just 3 years. The nationalist euphoria soon ebbs away, replaced by a sober realism. Anywhere that oil hasn't raised Arab states to unbelievable wealth, the Arab world remains backward and poor. Many disappointed people seek refuge and comfort in Islam, with its emphasis on justice and its apparent incorruptibility.
Religion has returned because it offers every individual a sanctuary, the feeling of security lent by faith, and especially by Islam. Islam offers everyone the guarantee of spiritual certainty, a strength that will accompany him from the beginning of his life to its end.
But what religion is this? There is no single authority in Islam. There are institutions, like the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, that have a degree of authority. But in reality, any believer in any branch of Islam can choose which scholar and which interpretation of the faith he will follow. From fine moral judgments, protecting individual human rights, to radicals preaching confrontation and holy war.
Nowadays, anyone can go online and have access to thousands of different authoritative interpretations of the Quran or Islamic law. And because in Islam there is no pope to say which interpretation is right, which interpretation is wrong, that becomes the purview of the individual.
Muslims believe in the Quran as the word of God. A community of the faithful grew out of Muhammad's vision. But today, the Holy Book does not just unite Muslims, it separates them too. The question is, where does the Holy Book belong? In the mosque or in the civil constitution? Islamic countries have answered this question in many different ways. There have long been not just one, but many Islamic worlds. But outside of Islam, many people still confuse the fanatical interpreters of the faith with the great majority of Muslims who abhor terror just as much as the rest of the world.
They say Muslims are violent people. Muslims are terrorists. You have to be careful when you deal with them. But then I have to ask, who started the 2 world wars that killed at least 60 million people?
And I don't think you can blame faiths for the vast majority of the conflict situations we have today. I don't believe that. Indeed, I would go further. I would say that if those conflicts, which are essentially political conflicts, if they were resolved, interfaith relationships would automatically find their right place.
We have to give the Muslims time. Europe needed hundreds of years to achieve certain things. How long did it take for women to achieve the position and the dignity they have in modern societies? You can't expect all that to happen overnight in Islam.
Arab system is tribal system. And the tribal system, the head of the tribe, he is the man who thinks. He is the man to distribute the food. He is the man to order. So for that, people just to obey. This matter made the Arab world is behind. Now we say to change the tribal, and this is what Islam started, to change the tribal to a society.
The rapid increase in literacy and education in the Muslim world, the rise of new technologies like satellite television and the internet, which has made information and opinions available to people in ways that would have been unimaginable, 20, 30 years ago. In fact, I always say that the internet plays the same role in the Islamic Reformation that the printing press played in the Christian Reformation.
The only way to eradicate extremism, the only way to eradicate violence or ignorance or misunderstanding is through education. We only can do it through education. You cannot do it otherwise.
More than 1,300 years after Muhammad, the Islamic world has many faces between ancient traditions and radical modernization. Where oil income turns into targeted investment in countries like the United Arab Emirates, Islam easily combines the modern with the traditional. Those in power can construct both universities and magnificent mosques. Elsewhere in the region, the challenges may be far greater. Islam brings comfort and support in poverty and hardship. But if it is to steer its supporters away from the fundamentalists, it must find a way to coexist with the world's economic and political development for the ultimate good of its believers.